Good morning, FAA folks. We are about to get started for today. We've got Toad tips and tricks starting for about an hour and 15 minutes. Then we're going to move over to Foglight for databases. I'm Jason Demaro with Quest Public Sector. Brianna Kiernan from Quest Public Sector is also on. We are both federal sales leads. And Russ Tuttle will be presenting first with Toad Oracle tips and tricks. And then we have Susan Wong doing Foglight for databases. So please feel free to ask questions. This session is for you all. We want it to be interactive. We're going to do a question and a Q&A after each section at the end. But raise a hand, put a question in the chat. We will answer it. And we look forward to getting started here shortly. Got 2 more people joining.
Also, just want to let you all know that you are unmuted. So feel free to go ahead and mute yourselves. And then, like Jason said, if you have a question, you can just go ahead and unmute and feel free to ask. And then there's a questions box as well as a chat box.
All right. Steady at what, 13 folks, 12 folks? We'll go ahead and turn it over to Russ and get started on the Toad for Oracle tips and tricks. Looking forward to your interaction and questions. So thank you, Russ. We'll get started.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this Toad tips and tricks. As Jason said, this will take about an hour and 15 minutes, and please feel free to ask questions during the presentation, but if you want to wait till the end, that's fine, and we will leave some time, open it up for some tips and questions at the end of this. So with that, we're going to jump right in here and get busy with the tips and tricks. One of the other resources that you do have available to you that is Toad World. Toad World's a website that we provide free that you can click into to get information about Toad for Oracle. There's actually a video on there. You can watch that. This is also being recorded. You can drill on in. And one of the real nice things at Toad World is you can scroll down to the bottom. It will give you highlights of the tools. Many of these we're going to go over today, talk about many of the key features here in Toad for Oracle. But one of the best things down here is that there's also some free online web training that you can connect on up to and walk through. It's self-paced, you can find any technical documentation. And the forums here on Toad World are great. These are people out in the real world using Toad that help answer questions. So if you have more business-like technical questions, things you want to do, concerned about, you can ask those, as well as writing to Jason or Brianna, your sales reps here. So switching back, we are on Toad 13. Toad 13.3 is the latest, but any of the Toad 13s is pretty up to date, and everything you'll see today will be in that particular Toad. What I'm going to go through today in this tips and tricks is we're going to look at ways to make you more efficient, get more out of the editor here in Toad for Oracle, ways to configure your schema browser. We'll take a quick look at the database browser for the DBAs on the line. And this tips and tricks is going to be very good whether you're a DBA, developer, analyst, troublemaker, or some other unknown role. We're also going to look at the graphical query builder, my favorite part of Toad. I'm lazy and I don't like typing. And as you can see down here towards the bottom of the schema browser that's active on screen right now, is quite often you have tables that have long names that are no fun to type, very similar, easy to get typos. So pointing and clicking is a very efficient way to get your SQL up and running. We're going to look at the master detail browser, which is a great feature here in Toad for Oracle to allow you to browse, view, edit, validate data across many different objects in the database, across schemas, regardless of whether your RI, your referential integrity, is at the database level, the application code level, or a mix thereof. We'll look at the ER diagramming capabilities and its links to our Toad data modeling tool, where you can build logical models, convert those to physical models. We can also do reverse engineering, break down those models into various different business or functional area decompositions, great for documentation. As I mentioned, we're going to look at the graphical query builder. We're going to look how you can automate many of these processes, these Toad for Oracle functions here in the tool. We'll look at some of the abilities to compare, whether comparing schemas, comparing data, and there'll be a few other things along the way. We're going to look at SQL optimization too. So with that, we're going to get in. One of the real nice things is if you're working with more than 2 or 3 databases, one of the real nice features in Toad for Oracle is the ability here to assign a color to that particular connection. Here we can see green, blue, red, yellow, fuchsia. Whether you have done that from the beginning or making a new connection, you can go back and assign colors to different connections. Nice little tip is just make your production red. So anytime you see red at the bottom of your screen, you think twice before you hit run or whatever it is you're going to do. The other real nice thing with using colors for your different connections is up here you can see I've got a Quest Dev connection, I've got a QPSI reporting connection, and a Quest Prod connection. It's red, blue, and green. And we can see all my open Toad for Oracle functions. There's a couple schema browsers, but they're red, blue, and green here. Those associate with that connection. Now, when you have 3 or 4 connections up and running, this can get a little confusing as to which editor belongs to which connection, which schema browser, and so forth. So the colors make it easier. And as you can see, when I'm on this Quest Dev one, the bottom of my screen is red. If I were to click on this blue schema browser here, we can see that the screen is blue. So I now know that this QPSI is my active connection. But even so, if you have 5, 10 databases open, it can get very cluttered up here. So one trick that's very nice here is if you right-click at the end of all those Toad for Oracle functions, there's an option here that says Show Buttons for Current Connection. That is by default off, and if you click that on, now you can see we're only seeing the 2 blue Toad for Oracle functions I have open. If I click on the red, we've got more functions open, but it keeps it very clear. So I know exactly what I'm working with and where. So this is a very nice way to keep your screen clear, keep your mind clear, make yourself more productive and have less confusion. Also, if you take nothing else away from today's presentation, remember Toad is a very right-click happy tool. And wherever you right-click, you're going to find all sorts of unique things to do. Such as right now, we're on this Quest Dev schema. Now, that could be my sign-on schema. It could be the schema I work in. But what's nice is any schema that you come into, if you right-click, I've already set this as my default schema. Yours will say click to set this as the default. So once you select a schema to work with, and if you're working mostly with one schema in a database, set that as a default so you just don't have to go searching for it each time you come into the schema browser. The other thing here is most of you, if you're using Toad, the default view was this single row of tabs going across. And if you're a DBA or developer and using all sorts of different features in Oracle, it can be a little bit cumbersome, annoying to kind of click back and forth to find what you like in here. So what's real nice is if you right-click on one of these tabs, you'll see the first thing that pops up is Configure. If I click on Configure, now I can see all those tabs here, and what we can do is you can turn off by clicking in this visible tab column, turn off all the ones you don't typically work with very often. You can scroll down, turn off many of these, and then you can save that configuration so it's easy to recall. You can always bring things back, add more, take away, and I've got just one saved here. I've got this demo 2020 configuration, and when I click OK, now you'll see it doesn't look any different here, but I can come over here, and now where it says browser style, I'm going to go to the tab multi-line view, and I just have that configuration there. So I've got it down to that workable subset of tabs that I like to work with. They're all visible to me. Now you can do a drop down, a tree view, and I'll let you look at that on your own and figure out which view, which configuration you like best here in Toad for Oracle. Now I'm clicking on this customer table, and I've got a few tabs over here now to the right. Most of you will see a few more, and that's because I've done my right click on one of these tabs, and I've turned off a few of the tabs that I don't use very often, like policies, auditing. You may be using those, but you can turn things off. And maybe if you're just an analyst, technical business analyst, you might only want to have columns, data, and one or two other things up there. So you can keep your screen very clean. So now when I hit OK, I've got my schema browser configured to where I can be very productive. And this will stay persistent. So if we were to close down Toad right now, come back, after lunch tomorrow, this is how it's going to look. So I don't need to reconfigure it each time. Another nice little tip for the DBAs or anybody, but particularly DBAs, when you come in the morning, quite often you've got to connect up to many different database instances, and then you've got many different SQL scripts that you're loading up, whether you're doing scripts to check the log files, user config scripts, backup scripts, other performance scripts, just to see what's going on. That can take a lot of time coming up here to the session menu, coming in here, opening this up, selecting one at a time, connecting. That can take quite a while to load up and get everything. And then you come here to this editor and have to find those scripts and load those in. So what you can do is, however you want to start up in the morning, here you can see I've got 4 or 5 SQL scripts, statements loaded. I've got 1 function loaded. I've got 3 connections loaded. Well, up here, and the first time you will notice it, there's something that says no workspace or default workspace selected. I'm not going to choose it because I've selected this workspace here. What you want to do is save your current workspace, give it a name. So maybe this is your startup workspace or whatever you like. So this is nice. So when you come in the morning, all you have to do is load up this workspace, and it will go through and it will automatically connect up to the 3, 4, 5, 10 connections, load up all the SQL statements, have all the Toad for Oracle functions that you want up and ready. So while it's taking a couple minutes to connect, you can be looking at emails, going and getting your coffee. This can really help speed up, make you more productive during the day. Workspaces is one of my favorite features in Toad for Oracle. So now that we're here, as a developer, a DBA, maybe a change here, a change has occurred to this customer table. Well, what is going to be impacted by that change? Well, if we click here on this used by tab, what's nice is real quickly we can see that the customers is used in some functions, a package body. So we know these things we need to go check, make sure they're still valid, still work, that we haven't broke anything. The same way in your databases, if your RI, your referential integrity, is at the database level, you can quickly click here on the referential tab, but this will also let you know, hey, there's no relationships here. Maybe it's at the application code level. So here I can drill down and see that, this just has a child of orders. I thought it might have the child of order lines, but this isn't something that we'll need to diagram. So here, if I click like on this table here, we can see it has several children. We can see table is referenced by child tables, and it also has at least 1 parent. So this is a little bit more complex view. And if I want to understand this, maybe I'd like to see a visual. Maybe I need to document this part of the schema. And what I can do is I can right click on it. And one of my options here is ER diagram. ER stands for entity relationship. Entity is just another word for table, although I'm sure most of you knew that already here. So when I open that up, and you'll sometimes have to clean it up, but here we can see a nice little ER diagram. It will list all the tables in here. This is not true data modeling. This is just a diagrammatic tool. You're not going to be able to add joins, update the tables, or anything like this. This is just a diagram. But what's very nice here is you'll see there's this tab that says all items. This is what we call the workspace. And we can see the pages, 1.1, 2.1, 3.1. So it makes it very easy to print out for documentation, put on your wall to understand. But a lot of times you might have 25, 50 tables in here, and it's a little busy, and you kind of want to break out and create little business area or functional area decompositions. So whether in the model or from the list of tables here, I can highlight around in the model, and I've grabbed those 2 tables, and I do that right click again. And one of the options here is add into new workspace. So we're going to create a new workspace with those 2 tables or anything else related to it. So I click on that, and now you can see there's a new tab that says workspace 1. And here's those 2 tables that we were looking at. And you can clean these up. You can go ahead and add notes to these to document, hey, this is a business area looking at order entry, inventory, customer payment, whatever you want to do. You can attach notes to different tables to say that, hey, something needs to be done. Lots of things there. But what's also nice here is I can right click in the white space, and my first option is workspace properties. I'll click on that, and now we can give this a name. I'll call it FA Demo View 1. You would give it a more business meaningful name, and you can put in a little description here. So if you look at this later, you'll know what you're looking at, or if you share it with other Toad users, they'll know what this little workspace is. So now we have one drill down here. Now, you don't need to worry about if you had 20, 30, 50 tables trying to add all 10 in or whatever, how many tables you want into that workspace. We can come here. I'm going to highlight around 3 different tables here. And now when I right click on those, I can say, you know what, I want to also add those into that demo view, or I want to create another workspace. And you can have as many workspaces as you like here. And once again, most of the time you have to do a little cleanup here, rearrange things in there. But now I've got a nice little view of my model, and maybe, this is the customer view or something. And I'm looking in here, I can kind of see what the keys are, the relationships, and I may want to just go ahead and pull some data, write a script to grab some data from these 3 or 4 tables here. Instead of having to go to the editor and trying to remember the table names, the keys, and other column names, what I can do is I can come right here, and you'll see it says load diagram in Query Builder. This will load it in Toad's graphical query builder. I'm not going to do this now. I'm going to do it a little bit later here in the presentation, but it's a nice way to quickly build the template for a query or a complete query. It's very flexible in what you're wanting to do here. So we can save these models off with all the different workspaces, share those with other Toad users. If you do have a large model with lots of tables, what's nice is you can show the grid on the map. You can have the tables snap to the grid so they're all nicely lined up. Your lines are all lined up. You can generate a report. And if you have our Toad data modeling tool, so if you have like our DBA suite, or you guys already have Toad Data Modeler, you can pull this diagram into the Toad Data Modeling tool and take advantage of the full data modeling features, reverse engineering, updating the joins, adding things. So very good linkage between the Toad tools here. So now that we have the ER diagram built and saved the way we like it, we can come back to the schema browser. So real quickly, we've understood what's used by this particular object. We can see what it's used by, if any change occurs. We've understood if there's anything related to it, what we can pull data from. But if I go back to my customers table here, and we remember the customers table had the child of orders and it had a child of order lines. If I click on the data tab here for the customers, I'm just seeing the data in that customer table. I'm not seeing any of the data that relates to it in orders or order lines. If I click here on order lines, I'm just seeing the data as it resides in the orders table, not in how it relates to any data in the parent or in its child of order lines. So what we can do without writing a query, and this is another one of my favorite features here in Toad for Oracle, is this master detail browser. If you come up here, I'm sure no one's ever clicked on this other than by accident. So it's up here on the toolbar, Master Detail Browser, or under the database menu, you can go to Report. And this is where you can also find like the code roadmap, the ability to generate HTML documents for your schemas, your database, the graphical query builder. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to open up the Master Detail Browser. And when I open it up, it takes my default schema there, the Quest tab, and I'm going to go back to that customer table. But you can grab any table you like here, and that's one of the real nice things here in the Master Detail Browsers. I click on Customers, and now I'm seeing the data here in the customer table. If I come to the middle of the screen, what you'll see is that same Master Detail icon that's up on the toolbar, and it says add detail under this data set. So now we're going to grab its child. If it has a couple children, you'll be able to, it'll ask you which hierarchy do you want to drill down, or in a moment we'll see if it has no children, it will allow you to create your own master detail relationship. So here, when I click on that, we now see we've got customers to orders. And I believe that orders should have a child of order lines. And when I click here, oops, it doesn't show up, or maybe it doesn't exist in the database at all. Here we can see the child has that table foreign key showing, and if we're over here, what it will say is select foreign key. Down here you can see it says other, and if I now move over towards the middle of the screen, it says define the master detail relationship. So I'm going to click on that. This opens up a little define master detail relationship dialog box. So we can see the columns in the OW orders, and there's nothing down here. I can change schemas if I want to. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to find that OW order lines here, and I'm going to click on that, and there we can see all the columns. We can see there's no key columns chosen, so I'm going to come up here. I'm going to say I want a key on the order ID and the order ID. And now when I click OK, I've defined a little master detail relationship. Now, we can save this diagram so you don't need to recreate it each time, but how is this beneficial? Well, here, if I click on like this customer ID 102, I'm now seeing all the 102 children, and I'm on record order ID 250, I'm seeing all the 250 children. If I click down here, now it's the 304. So without writing a query, without really doing much of anything, I'm able to validate the data across multiple relational tables in here, making sure that the data is there, the keys are working, that everything is what I want. And what's nice is, especially if you have databases where the RI is at the application code level, you can create these master detail diagrams, share them with other Toad users, but you don't need to recreate them each time. So it's a nice way to quickly go in and validate, see data, view data, and if you have permissions, you can even edit data in here. So now going back to the schema browser, once again, we've looked at the master detail browser, we've looked at the ER diagram, we've looked at several tables, we've configured this, we're ready to go. Most of you at this point are already in the editor, writing your SQL, you're great SQL people, great typists, but I just want to show you the graphical query builder, which is something I think can help you save time, especially if your RI, referential integrity, is at the application code level where you can just drag and drop, point and click to build queries. Now you can do this in a couple ways. You can just open up the query builder here out of context, or you can come down on one table, do your right click and say, open up the query builder, and it will ask how many levels of referential integrity do we want to go down. In this case, we know customer had the child of orders and order lines, so we might select 2 or 3. What you can also do is, hey, we know I want these 3 tables here, so I'm going to just shift select those, do my right click, and it will take those 3 tables in. So if your RI is not there, it'll load the tables and then you can add that in later. So here, when I open up a query builder, what we'll see is I've got my customer table, my orders table, and order lines in here, and the beginning of a query down here. So all I have to do now to build my query is I'm going to say I'd like customer ID, customer name, I'd like balance from the customers table, I'd like order date from the orders table, and over here we'll take quantity and value. So now that's just a simple select, but we can see without typing, it's made a very nicely formatted SQL statement. And if I want to, I can just go ahead, hit my F9 key or hit the green arrow. And when I do that, we've now pulled back some simple data. We can now, if we needed to, just right click and export that off. And we're going to look at some of the export functions here in just a moment. But I want to do more to this query. So I'm going to click back here on the query tab. What I want to do is, let's say, something simple like sort. So I'll just right click on the customer name and I'm going to say include an order by clause. And we can see that was added in there with no typing. And I want to do a where clause. So once again, do a right click, select include and where clause. And we have 2 options. We can do a simple, where basically you're just choosing your operator, or complex. So here, if I just choose my operator, I'm just going to say where customer ID is greater than 202. You can look up the values, which is fine in like data warehouses. I wouldn't do it if you've got millions of rows. It can take a long time. We can also include subqueries here. And as I mentioned, if we click on the complex tab, you can take advantage of all the advanced SQL functions such as count, count distinct, min max, and many, many others, and do all sorts of things in there. But I'm a simple person. I'm going to keep this simple for right now. So I'll click OK, and there we can see the where clause is updated, and we're ready to go, and we can execute this. And if we click back on the generated query, you'll see down here, I can also change this to the ANSI join syntax if I want. And a little bit later, we're going to look at the Quest SQL optimizer. So you can quickly and graphically build a query, determine if it's a good query or not, and optimize it all right here in Toad in a very quick and productive time. Now we have our query up here graphically displayed. I can double click on any one of the joins and see if it's an inner join, outer join. If I want to change the join criteria, I have that capability. But as I mentioned, you may have tables that you want to query that aren't related. Maybe your your joins, that information is at the application code level. So if I brought in 3 non-related tables like this, what I can do is I can click here on whatever field I want, in this case, the customer ID, hold my mouse down and drag it over and let it go on the customer ID. And there I've created a join on the fly. And I'm going to do the same thing over here, order ID to order ID. So I'm just going to drag it over there, let it go. So very easily to create joins on the fly, much easier than typing those things all out. So once you've got the query like this, you can quickly then say, let's go load it in the editor and do a lot more complex stuff. But you can get very simple to pretty powerful queries built here in the graphical query builder. And just like with the ER diagram and the master detail browser, we can save these, reuse them, share them with other Toad users, use them as a template. You can put in notes here to sort of document what your query is doing. And if you wanted to add in other tables, like, hey, I want to make even more in this query, on the far right side of the screen, you'll see the object palette pops out, and I can take tables from this same schema. I can get them from a different schema. I can grab a view, add those in there, create those joins. And if for some reason you accidentally close out of your object palette and you don't see it over here on the side, in the middle of your screen on the graphical query builder, you can reopen that object palette. So you don't need to worry about, reconnecting, hooking things up again. So now we've got this. I really like it, but I do want to go ahead and take it on into my editor. So I'm going to click here. One of the real nice things is everyone on this call, I'm sure, has hundreds, if not thousands, of SQL scripts, SQL statements already built. Some of them simple, some of them complex. But what you can do in Toad is if I right-click when I have a SQL script in my editor, is I can reverse engineer back to the query builder. So especially if you've had to create joins and you sort of maybe want to visually understand what's going on in your query, it's very nice to be able to go either direction. So I can go from the editor to the query builder or the query builder to the editor. Now, once we have the query here in the editor, we can do all sorts of things. And hopefully some of these tips I'm going to show you right now will be very beneficial. At this moment, I'm going to pause for a second. I don't know if anyone's asked any questions, or if anyone has a question, go ahead and ask right now. Or if you want to wait to the end, that is fine as well. Just remember to unmute yourself if you're asking a question. Okay, I think everyone is just going to wait till the end. I don't see anything in the chat, which is great. So here in the editor, was there a question? No, sounds like somebody just unmuted themselves. So here, what we can do in here is please mute yourself. If whoever took yourself off mute there, we get a little background noise. In the editor, what's nice is, especially when we have these colors assigned, is if I go ahead and execute my query, we executed it, I can come in here and I'm just going to make some simple changes to my query. You guys make much more complex, creative changes than I'm doing, but I've made a couple just simple changes and executed the query each time. If I go down to this little red line at the bottom, we can see the execution time there for my most recent execution. But as developers, DBAs, even analysts, you're concerned about performance. So if I change a query, is it running faster, is it running slower, or is it running about the same? Well, if I wasn't keeping track as I'm making changes, it's not going to be very beneficial. But fortunately, Toad does that for you. So if I click here on the Query Viewer tab and just open this up a little bit, what we can see here is we can see when I started that query, how long it took to run. So here's my last 3 executions of that query, and you can kind of see the beginning line of that query, and you can even double click on that to see the whole query so you can see some of the changes. But this just lets me know my little changes really didn't affect performance too much. That also leads to, when you're in Toad, Toad has a function called SQL recall. Hopefully many of you are aware of it, but if not, Toad automatically saves your last 500 validly executed SQL statements off to a small DAT file. It's quite a mouthful, and we'll show you a couple tips to recall very easily. But you can change that number. If you want to save more, you can up it to 1,000, 5,000, whatever you'd like to do, or maybe you just want to keep 100. It's very easy. So here I've got a few scripts. I'm just going, or SQL statements. I'm just going to quickly execute them for demo purposes here. But if we come back to this tab, and I was like, oh, I accidentally got rid of my tab. Most of you are always busy doing 10 things at once, and I start typing, and then I realize, oh, I want that query back, or I need to rerun it. And maybe I was also in a big hurry and I forgot to save my graphically built query, and I don't want to take the time to recreate maybe the best query I ever wrote in my life. What can I do? I'm going to come up here to the View menu, and all you really need to remember here is F8. F8 is our SQL recall. As I mentioned, it saves your last 500 validly executed SQL statements off to a file. So when I click on that, we get a nice little pop-up window here, and there's 2 tabs. So here on recent, the first time you go in there, it's just going to be recent, and here's those recently executed SQL statements, and I can click on any one of them to see which is the one that I want to reload into my editor. So there's the one with the order by clause and my original where clause. So I can just go ahead and double click on that, or drag and drop and load it right on into my editor. Now here it just shows you the date and time of execution. Sometimes if you do have 300, 400, 500 SQL statements in here, it's a little bit hard, although most of the time you're just trying to find things that you've recently executed. But up here you can see this group by tab, and we can go here and say, I'm working with 5 or 6 databases, and I know I executed this against my Oracle One or Oracle Prod or Oracle Dev. I've just got one database, but you can come in here and drill down and now just see SQL that you executed against that particular database. We can also do it by date executed, which is a very useful one. Like, hey, I know I executed something on Monday. I need to go back and find that. So I can come in here, go back and look for something on that particular date. So you can go back in and look for things that you've executed on previous dates, as well as you may be working with multiple schemas in a database. So you can see all the different schemas, and I've just mostly executed against Quest Dev in there, so it's not very exciting. I need to execute against a few other things to make this better. But there's several different ways then that you can execute here. You can recall your SQLs on this recent tab. Now you'll see there's another tab here called Saved. Let's go look at that. So when you're in a window or in your Toad editor, and most of you, when you've got a SQL statement and you want to save it, you're doing the save file as, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we know sometimes Windows, you think you're saving to one folder and your path somehow got changed. It's saved somewhere where you didn't think it is. And then you spend a lot of time or waste a lot of time looking for that particular query. Toad for Oracle makes it very easy to organize where you save your SQL, how you name it, and not chase around looking for things all over your desktop again. So instead of doing that save file as, what you'll want to do is come up to the editor menu, and at the bottom of the other editor menu is you want to see this add to save SQLs. And when I click on that, it's going to pop up. And the first time you get in here, this category is just going to say default. And you can type in any name you like. So I've got a few categories I've created: my backup scripts, DBA scripts, demo. We've got an FAA demo category here, so I'm just going to select that. But you can type in any name here to create a category, and then we'll just call this demo SQL 27 for whatever unlogical reason. And when I hit OK, well, what has that done for me? Well, whether I've got something in an editor, I've got a blank editor, I come back a week from now, a year from now, this named SQL or saved SQL will be there. Where unlike the SQL recall, once you get to 501, it's going to push out a SQL statement. So here we can go to that F8 and come up here, and now instead of being on the recent tab, I click on the save tab, and here we can see I've got mine defaulted to category, but you can have no categories and just look at the names. You can have it via database, you can have it just by the names. So if I don't remember what category I saved it in, maybe I'll just click on name here, and I can come through here and say where it is. There's FAA customer SQL. Is that the one I'm looking for? So I can drill down, click on it, and look at it. So I've got all my SQLs here, but as I mentioned, I can also come up here to category, and I can say maybe I saved this in the FAA demo category, and sure enough, there's demo SQL 27, my FAA customer SQL. So it's a very easy way to kind of organize your SQL. So if you're a DBA and you've got your scripts in different categories here, instead of trying to go out, find those folders where you've got all your scripts, makes it very easy. And you can do categories via database, all sorts of different ways. You can import and export these. So if you're working sometimes at home, sometimes in the office, very easy to make sure you have all your named and saved SQLs in the same place. There's a few other things you can do there, but that's a real nice little tip and trick here. The other thing though is many of you maybe want to be more productive, or like me, kind of lazy. I don't always like to hit F8, find my save tab or recent tab, and then which category, and scroll down and do all that. You know, that's a few extra clicks, and a few extra clicks each day, over each week, over each month, over each year really adds up. So the less I can click, the better. So when you're in an editor for your SQL recall, just your recently executed statements, if you hit the Alt key, ALT, which is the key right next to your space bar, and the up arrow or down arrow, we can scroll through your recently executed SQL statement. So it's very nice there to do that. Now, if we wanted to recall one of our saved SQLs, what you can do in your editor is you can hit Control N, N as in named or N as in Nancy. And when I hit that, now we can see my whole list of all my named SQLs here. And there's that demo SQL 27, and all you have to do is double click on it. So it's a little bit easier to recall your named SQLs. And if we hit Control N again, you can add on to make a script, but you'll also notice in here that it has the category, so you know which category those are in as well. So just a couple ways to make you a little bit more productive here and in the editor. Some other things that are very nice in the editor, although this feature I find half the people love, half the people hate. This is our, what we call our Toad Insight, but basically it's our Toad IntelliSense. So here, if I type out the table name, OW customers, and now I pause for a second. Many of you have seen this. If I hit the period and pause, don't keep typing, I get this little pop-up window. Some people love it, and it works great when you just have a few objects in your schema, a few objects in your table. If you're something like in Oracle e-business that has 20, 30, 40,000 tables, and tables that have 400 or 500 columns, it can take a little while to pop up. It can be a little cumbersome, and more than likely you're going to want to turn it off. But for some of you, you like it, but maybe it pops up too quickly. You'd like a little more think time. So what we can do when this window pops up, you'll see it says options here, the little icon. It also matches the Toad options. You can go in that way. But this way will take us in context here. And if I click on that, what we'll do now is we'll drill into the Toad for Oracle options. We're on the editor under Code Assist. And here you can see it says Code Insight. That's our IntelliSense. And The first option here is auto invoke. If you want to turn off that IntelliSense, just click there and now it's off and it will never bother you again. If you like it, but you say, you know what, I want a little more think time. So here we can see pop-up auto invoke delay. This is how many milliseconds. You can come in here and change that if you like. Also here, what do you want to include in that pop-up window? Well, most of the time, most people really only want the table name. So you can turn off things that you don't really want in there. You can leave everything in there, or you can just have tables and views, whatever you want in there, and that'll speed up the performance. And right below here, here's where the SQL recall is and statements to save. Here's our default at 500, and this is where you can change it to whatever amount you like. And we'll be back in here in the Toad options in a moment to look at a couple other features in here. So once again, that's our IntelliSense, our Toad Insight. And if you like it, great. If not, my feelings aren't hurt. It just whichever way makes you enjoy the experience in Toad and makes you more productive is how you should set it. A couple other things that are very nice in here. We have something called code snippets. You may have the little pop-up box out here right now that you'll see might not be there. It's also under the view menu. It's the first thing here. If you select those code snippets, what's real nice here is this pops up. I'm going to hit the little thumbtack, and now you'll see what we've got over here is all sorts of little code snippets, and they're by different categories: cursor attributes, data conversion functions, your SQL optimizer hits, PL SQL unit testing things, group functions. And we're on date functions. So if I wanted to use a date function, maybe I want current date in my code, or do something like add months. Well, if I'm not familiar with all these date functions, if I click on one, you'll see down below here, it just gives me a brief little description of what this function will do for me. So here I'm going to just grab the current date function. We can see this returns the current date. I've got the place in my editor, and I can either drag and drop or double click. And there we can see I've got current date. I hit my comma there, and now I can execute. And hopefully if I did that right and click on the data grid, I've got a current date now in there. So real nice way to grab some code snippets that we've got available for you here in Toad for Oracle. A couple other things that are nice in here is we've got an auto replace. This is great for creating shortcuts, as well as if you're like me, there's certain things you mistype all the time. So if I come in here, it seems like when I type, half the time I miss the first E in select. It's just one of those little brain things I can't get over. But instead of getting an error or having to backspace and retype and say a naughty word, I can just hit my space bar and, oops, I think I've got mine set on case sensitive. So there you can see it changes to select, but we can put in things like NDF, a little shortcut, which does no data found when I hit enter or space bar, and maybe RAE for raise application error. My favorite one, being nice and lazy, or sometimes I'll say I like to be more productive. So if I type SS, and then when I hit my space bar, it does select star from. And this may seem silly, but if you're typing that 100 times a day, if I can save 10, 20 keystrokes, that really adds up over a week, a month, a year, a career. So little things like that. Also, if you're doing some PL SQL, we have a bunch of embedded PL SQL templates that you can quickly call up. You can add your own, you can modify ours, and you can remove ours from the list to make things more efficient or cleaner. So in your editor, if you hit Control Spacebar, you'll get this window that kind of looks like your saved SQLs that pops up. And we've got things like anonymous block, for loops, cursor declaration, all sorts of things that you may or may not use daily, weekly, monthly in your job. But here, if I double click on anonymous block, there's my anonymous block template, and my cursor's right there in the middle, so I'm ready to get typing. So this is a nice feature that we have. And if we go back up to the Toad options icon and open it up, takes a second here, we click on in, and under the editor, you'll see there's code templates, and you can add your own, edit any existing one, remove the ones. So you can scroll through here, and some of these may be dated, some you don't like, but you clean these all up, put in your own templates. You can share these with other Toad users, back them up. So it's very nice little feature in here. We saw the code assist. There's also the auto replace here. So here's the list in there. Here's where I had like my SS, and I did have mine as case sensitive. Next time I may take that off for my select and select, but the case sensitive is good if you have the form and from. Many of us have done select star form, get mad, like it correct to from, but once in a while you need to be able to use the word form, so case sensitive can help out there. So those are a few things in the Toad options. There's many other things in here as well. If you want to look up a lot of these shortcuts that we have in Toad for Oracle, you can see down here under toolbars and menus, this shows a lot of those keyboard shortcuts, and you can actually set your own. So if there's something in here like the add to save sequels, which was very nice, it doesn't have a shortcut, and you may not always want to go up to the editor menu, find that add to save sequels and do it. You can click here on this in the window, and then just hit whatever keystrokes you like. So I did Shift Control Caps Lock if we open that up a little bit. And now I've added a little shortcut to it. You can print out these shortcuts. You can reset a current one, reset all those. So it's just a nice way to get your own little Toad shortcut cheat sheet out. And once again, get more out of Toad. And there's several other little things here, like when we looked at the query builder, you can customize how it looks. Do you want table names in the columns, schema names in the table names, all sorts of little things in there. So it's worthwhile combing through the options to find out some things in there. Another nice little feature here that many people are not aware of in Toad that I like as well, being lazy too, is our formatting feature in the editor. As you can see, sometimes we don't always type out the neatest code. Maybe you're doing something you think is going to be a one-off, but you end up using it more. Or I like just focusing on what I'm doing, not worrying about the aesthetics of my code. And we can see the code that's in this editor right now. I have some keywords that are lowercase, some keywords that are uppercase. I have many clauses on this one line, and to clean this up to make it more maintainable, production ready, just easier to read, sometimes can be a little bit of a pain in the neck to put your cursor here, hit enter, and do all those sorts of things. So what we can do is you can either come to the toolbar, and there's this little esoteric icon of a bucket with a couple blue brackets, and sometimes it's a little hard to find in our very busy toolbar. So what you can do is you can just right click in the editor, and about halfway down, you see formatting tools, and there's that little bucket icon to let you know that it's on the toolbar. We have a little file called fmtplus.opt that has all the formatting rules in there, and you can go edit that. So maybe your organization, your project, your team, or maybe your own personal preferences, you have ways you like to format your code, present it. You can go in and change those for yourself, but you can also share that file with other Toad users, so everyone on your project, your team, your organization, your application can have things formatted the same way. But for right now, let's just look and see what happens here when I click format. We added a quick little simple header. All my keywords are uppercased. All my clauses now have their own line and are lined up very nicely. So nice to go from that to that with one click. And that, once again, that's a right click in your formatter. And if we right click and come down in here and go to the formatter options, what we'll see is the ability to modify those. So here we're on the formatter. We can see the path to that fmtplus.opt file. You can save that off. We can come in here and you can then, hey, I want to add a new header. So, this is Quest software, whatever you want in there, how we handle margins, tabs, how do we handle your keywords, your casing, uppercase, lowercase, alignments, all sorts of fun things there. Do you like your commas trailing or leading? Lots of different things that you can do in the formatter. So we've seen some of the shortcuts in the editor. We've seen the formatting. One thing I do come across quite often when I'm on site visiting people or talk to people using Toad is they often will have multiple copies of Toad open, and that's not always a good thing. It puts more of a load, creates more sessions, and it's just hard to keep track of, hey, which Toad did I do something in? I might have the same thing open in 2 or 3 places, and that isn't a very efficient way to be. And why that happens is you might have a SQL statement like this, and you go and hit this, and now you've got this window here. And now I'm kind of locked out of Toad. So that's when people will come down and open up 2 or 3 different copies of Toad while they're kind of locked out. Well, you don't need to do that. If you look at this SQL statement, it's conveniently named TSR demo SQL. What is TSR? TSR is Toad script runner. And if you come up to the editor menu, you'll see there's in the middle of the drop down, it says execute SQL via TSR. TSR is kind of like a mini Toad. We can execute it this way, or instead of hitting this button here, execute a script, if we select execute via Toad script runner, watch what happens. Takes a second, and now you'll see the Toad script runner is up here, and we see that window. But now while this is running, I can click back in here, and now I can stay busy here in Toad. I can keep working on whatever it is that I'm working on, doing things. I can look at, my data compares, ER diagrams, but I can keep working in Toad while that TSR is kind of running in background. And you can have as many TSRs up and running as you like. So if you have 2 or 3 long-running SQL statements, you don't need to worry about, oh, now I've got to go open another Toad and do that. We can do that all right here in this one window here. So if I come back down here to my TSR, and you can see I've got 2 up and running. One is still going. And if I click on this one, we can see it's completed. I can see the data in the data grid here in my TSR. And what's really nice here is maybe I wanted to run something in test against my test or development instance. And then it's like, okay, now it's ready for production. I can come up here and I can disconnect, reconnect to a different database. I can commit, roll back. I can make changes to my SQL in here. Maybe I want to get rid of something in here and just do that. Now I can come here and I can re-execute it here in this window. I can save it off. So it's like a mini Toad or a Toad Lite. But once again, this can help you be more productive here. So once we have a SQL statement the way we like, many of you are like, okay, now I've, my code is doing what I want. Now, hopefully I've written it really well, but I'm going to check and see, or maybe I want to try and optimize it. Many of you, if you haven't been using our SQL optimizer, you optimize via explain plans. And you can see the little icon on the explain plan tab, and it's right up here on the toolbar to generate that explain plan. Explain plans, no matter how many times I look at them, to me are always kind of confusing, cryptic, very non-intuitive. So if you still want to do your explain plan or use the explain plan and try and figure out what's going on in your code, one way that Toad can make it a little bit easier for you is if you right-click in your explain plan and go up to display mode, we can see that it defaults to the Oracle tree. If I come down here, one of the options is plain English. So when I click on that, now we can see my explain plan is in numeric order and in sentence-like structure. So this makes it a little bit easier to understand. We can also right-click here, go back to display mode, and set it up as a graphic. Now we can kind of see almost like a process flow for your SQL statement. And if you mouse over any part, it gives you a breakdown of the cost, shows you the cardinality, shows you the time. So just another way to kind of digest and understand what your SQL statement is doing. But most of you, whether you're a DBA developer, you're doing 10 things at once. Rarely are you doing anything uninterrupted, and trying to go through an explain plan, figure out what's going on, figure out where you can improve it, then come up and rewrite that code can take a lot of your valuable time, and it's hard to stay focused. Also, what if the code is about as good as it's going to get and you don't want to waste your time? So this is where the Quest Optimizer really comes in handy. If I hadn't been talking, we would already know if this is good code or bad code. So you have a couple options with our optimizer. There's the little icon up here that looks like a tuning fork with a lightning bolt, and you can have either auto optimize right in Toad. And this first option, I would say it's really good if you've got a SQL statement that's 5, 10, 15 lines long. Once you get over that, or 20 lines, 30 lines long, you probably want to take the advantage of the full advanced SQL optimization. There's no right or wrong, and you can use either way, but I want to do the advanced SQL optimization to show you all the features. You can also, if you can't remember that icon, can right click in the editor, come in here and select advanced SQL optimization. You get this little refactor window. You can skip it or just hit OK. And then the first time you do this, if you haven't used it before, it's going to down here say launching SQL Optimizer. And if that doesn't pop up, it means you haven't installed the optimizer. And you can reach out to Brianna or Jason, and they will let you know how you can get that. Here we have this optimization selector window. 95% of the time, you're just going to be optimizing an individual SQL statement, and that's what you want. But sometimes you may want to select the batch optimizer. The batch optimizer is really good if you've waited to the end of a development cycle and tomorrow as a developer, you're throwing everything over to the DBAs and you want to just make sure no bad code goes over. Or maybe you have a package or a procedure that has 5, 10, 20, 30 pieces of SQL embedded in it. And instead of pulling those all out individually to optimize, you can batch optimize. And we'll show that in a moment. For right now, let's just optimize this one SQL statement. So I click OK, and this one now, open up the SQL optimizer. And we very quickly can tell you is that good code or bad code. So now you can see in my window, here's our SQL statement. We have all sorts of buttons, all sorts of tabs. We're going to look at many of these, but we're on the Optimize SQL tab. And here's our SQL statement in the window. And over here, there's some SQL information. By default, it will be on the Execution Plan tab. What you'll want to do is click here on the SQL Information tab. And the reason we do that is we classify your SQL in one of 3 ways. And you see it says click Explain Plan to get that classification. Explain Plan is one of the buttons up here. So when I click on that, it will now go get our classification. We classify your SQL in one of 3 ways, whether it's simple, complex, or problematic. And this is based on a series of rules like the number of scan operations in your code. If your code comes back simple, you know, hey, this code's as good as it's going to get. Maybe I can add an index to improve performance, but I don't want to waste my valuable time trying to rewrite it. And as you can see, my code came back problematic. We've got also problematic or complex. This means that if you run this code now through our SQL optimizer, you will find a better way to rewrite this code. But as I mentioned, if I hadn't been talking, you would have opened up the optimizer, clicked on Explain Plan, boom, it's problematic. So in a matter of about 5 or 10 seconds, you've determined that this code can be improved, as opposed to wasting a lot of your valuable time combing through Explain Plans. Now at this point, we can click on Rewrite. If you click on Rewrite here in the optimizer, we are going to find every single way possible to rewrite your SQL statement that is semantically equivalent to the original, which is just a fancy way of saying we're going to return the same data, but give you a different execution plan. And then we rewrite those rewrites, and we keep rewriting those till we've exhausted all possibilities. So if you have a big SQL statement, that can take a lot of time. So what we can do, and if you notice the little icon on the rewrite button is a little blue tuning fork, is we can scroll all the way over here and you'll see there's that blue tuning fork again with the number 2 by it. When I mouse over it, it says Optimizer Intelligence Level. We can drill down into the optimizer options here, and we have 5 levels of intelligence or optimizer intelligence. I would recommend the first time you start using this tool to either have it on level 2 or level 3. Level 2 caps it off at 1,000 rewrites, so it will finish a little faster, and you'll only get 1,000 rewrites. It doesn't mean we'll always generate that many, but there is that potential for that to happen. In levels 3, 4, and 5, you can see we can generate many, many more thousands of alternatives. But sometimes if you have a critical SQL statement, one that you really need to get the most out of, and you don't find a good alternative at level 2 or maybe 3, you can amp it up to 4 or 5. But for right now, we're just going to leave it here on level 2. So at this point, we can go ahead and rewrite. We can also try and find a virtual index for this single SQL statement, meaning we'll find and test a bunch of indexes, let you determine which table spaces you want to put those in, temporarily create them. You can test it, and then it will undo, roll back, but leave you the code if you like that one. And we can rewrite an index together. And if you're in a hurry or doing many things at once, and you don't want to focus on optimizing, you can click over here on the auto optimize button. It's kind of like a 5 o'clock button. What you would do is get your SQL in here, set your rewrite and index optimization level, click auto optimize, and then you go home or go to lunch or go do your other tasks, go to a meeting, and this will do all the rewrites and test all the rewrites and let you know which is the best alternative. I'm going to open up a save session here, and once you do click something like rewrite or auto optimize, it will start generating alternatives down here, and you can cancel out at any time. So hey, it's got 100 alternatives, that might be good enough. I can stop it there. But once you get all your alternatives, you'll see there's this test run, and we can test run all, we can test run selected, so you could just pick the first 10, first 100, however many you like. And you can also, if you're going against large data sets, when you start your test, you can tell it, hey, limit the rows retrieved. Just bring back the first 10 rows, maybe the first 100 rows. Find your best 2 or 3 tuning alternatives, and then go back and test those against a larger data set. So we give you a lot of control and flexibility in here. So in this case, on level 5, for this SQL statement, I found over 1,600 different ways to rewrite that SQL statement. And I have a small data set, so I did test run all of them, and it came back and it said 7 were faster, and this alternative 404 gets the cool little trophy. And then right away, I can just quickly see the magnitude of improvement, looking at this. And maybe I might have to do some other things to find some more improvement for this code. But what's really nice is, hey, if I'm good to go, I can just load the original or the best alternative to wherever I want and use it. But as developers, DBAs, you want knowledge transfer. You want to understand what's going on. You want to have your skill set grow. And this tool is a great knowledge transfer tool. So here I can click on this, click on the compare tab, and come down in here. And what we can do is we can compare explain plans side by side if you want to do that. I don't like doing that, but you can also compare the SQL side by side. So here in the middle of the screen, we've got the original SQL on the left and the best alternative, 404 with the trophy. But we can look at any of the alternatives if we want to, see what they've done. Maybe one does something a little different that we prefer for our environment. But here, if I drill down in here, what you can see is where it's highlighted in this bright green, we can see where the changes were made. So I can look on one side to the other, and as an experienced DBA or developer, you might say, oh yeah, that's exactly something I would have considered, or wow, I didn't know you could do that. So your skills can grow. And in this case, we can see all these were kind of individual clauses with the parenthesis around them. And over here, it removed those parentheses, made this one big clause, and some of the lines it added that +0 to force it to use the hint. So you can kind of see what it did very easily in here. And we can also come up to the top and look at some of the key statistics. Our default tuning goal is elapsed time, and that's why this is in light blue. But you could set your tuning goal for CPU, maybe table scans, consistent gets, so a few other things in there. And where you can see here, in this particular case, alternative 404 was green on elapsed time. We improved this by 20%, which is very good, but we could probably find some better tuning as well. But it's also was the best on CPU and table scans. So, sometimes some of the other alternatives might be a little better on the CPU, and you may decide you want to use that one instead. But we let you make that business decision. So that is just optimizing a SQL statement here. we can find index or indexes for a group of SQL statements. As I mentioned, we can batch optimize a whole bunch of SQL statements. And whether you're a developer or DBA getting ready to go from dev to test, QA, prod, you may want to scan through all your code to find that complex or problematic SQL. So this is nice when, maybe as a DBA, they're getting ready to throw everything over the fence, and you want to just make sure no complex or problematic code comes in your environment. Or as a developer, you want to make sure you're putting out only good code. So here we've got a little scanning job, and I can go through, and it's all wizard based, so it's very easy to use. We can scan through existing database objects. So if you remember what you're working on, you can drill down in and get very atomic. I can say, I know I worked on a few of these functions here. If I can't remember what I worked on, hey, I'm just going to scan through all my packages. Or as a DBA, hey, I just want to scan through maybe one particular schema, or maybe the entire database, but I can pick and choose what it is I want to scan through. I can also scan through source code, whether it's text files, SQL Plus scripts, and we have this button here, this inspect or option inspect SGA. As you'll see, there's an SGA inspect tab up here. Typically, this is used by DBAs. Hey, maybe right now you're noticing there's some performance issue going on. Maybe you're having high buffer gets, high CPU. Let me capture all the SQL that's currently being executed, and I can define that by looking at certain schemas, certain users. I can grab everything or narrow down that search, and then I can scan through it. And in this case, I've got a nice little scan. And if I was a developer, I'm pretty proud here. Under the problematic column, so far I just see one thing here, and I can go in and look at that, and I could send it back to the optimizer. Or if I want to, let's say if we scroll down a little bit more and see if I can find some more bad code in here, or just non-optimized code. Here we can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 7 objects, and maybe I'm in a hurry. And so instead of going through the optimization process individually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send these back to the batch optimizer, queue all those up, and run those at one point in time. Now, I know I went through a lot of these things very quickly. You've been sitting here very patiently for an hour listening to me ramble on. If I go up to the help menu, you can go here. You can either go to Toad World and see some things, or you can just go in here into help. And when you open up the help, you'll see there's some SQL Optimizer tutorials on the table of contents. So how do you want to optimize your SQL? There's a nice little tutorial to walk you through optimizing the SQL, using that SGA inspector, using the table scan, using the batch optimizer, how to queue that up, how to get the most out of it. So this will allow you to go back and do that when you have more time to look into the SQL optimizer. So with that, I'm going to come back here to Toad for Oracle, close down this little window. And so what we've gone through so far today is we've looked at things in the editor, the schema browser. We've looked at the graphical query builder, the master detail browser. We've looked at the ER diagramming, SQL optimization. Now we're just going to look at a few other sort of one-off things. For DBAs, one of the real nice features here is a lot of these things that you do in Toad, you kind of do in order, you do again and again. So what's nice is up here, you'll see there's a little lightning bolt that says Automation Designer. And if you open this up, we can automate many of the Toad for Oracle functions. There's some tabs here like your data functions, import, export, some of the DBA miscellaneous, maybe you're doing your reporting, your compares, some of the utilities, file management, and we can put in some Boolean logic. So here you can create a new, we call them little apps, but here you can see I've got like a little export one where I'm saying in Toad, I'm going to select the compare table feature, then I'm going to export a data set, maybe then export the DDL, execute a certain script, put in a little query saying, maybe if that export fails, email me, do something else. But we can do all sorts of different automations in here. So as you can see, we can export the DDL, import table data. These can be very useful if you're getting into sort of DevOps type steps. We click on this one. Hey, do we want to compare the objects? So when you're moving from dev to prod to reporting. Are all those schemas still in line? Are they, is there anything out of sync? We can compare the schemas here. So I mentioned you can execute scripts. We can do all sorts of file management, moving things, delete directories, create files. We've got a lot of the utilities in here of Toad. So a lot of neat things that you can automate and schedule. If you maybe don't want to automate all these different Toad for Oracle functions, but maybe you want to be able to run scripts in batch, whether manually or schedule them, if you come up to the utilities menu, we have this nice feature here called the script manager. And you can hook it up to one database connection. I've got it hooked up to all three. So maybe it's a DBA, you have some user config scripts that you want to run across a series of databases. Check all the backup files, all the log files. You can have those scripts in a little file down here. And so now I can say for these three instances or connections, I want to run a series of these scripts. You can come in here, add scripts. You can edit your scripts in here. And once you have this, I can manually run this. So I can run many scripts against multiple connections or against one database without loading those all manually up here into the editor. And these can also be scheduled. You can create little files here with those scripts. You can save this off. You can change your connections, add in connections. So it's a very nice little feature. We did look, there is the ability to compare schemas, compare data in here, and that's under the database menu. If we come in here, we can compare data. I can compare data from one table to another, or I can compare multiple tables. Multiple tables was added in Toad 12, so if you're using an older version, you may not, or have upgraded but aren't aware of that, that's in there. We can compare databases, cross connection. We can look for data duplicates here in Toad. And one of the real nice things is, as I mentioned, we used to only be able to compare one schema to another, but now you can compare one schema to several schemas in here. So let me go ahead and open up a compare schemas window here. I've got one completed, but let's go through the setup in here. So I've got my Quest prod schema, but I can click here and I can say, let me compare it to my dev schema. Maybe I want to compare it to several schemas. So you might have a dev, prod, reporting. So I come down here, we'll compare it to reporting. So I'm in here and I'm on just one database, but you can switch, choose all your different connections in here, and I can compare across multiple schemas. What is it that you're looking at? Developers, you're probably just looking at your tables, your views, your functions, packages, procedures, those kind of things. DBAs, you're probably looking at everything in here. And then you can set that and you can go ahead and run it. And then once you run the compare, what's real nice is you get this kind of interactive page, but you can also print it out, save it, generate a little report here. So what's nice with this is we can see I compared my dev to my prod schema. And we've got a whole bunch of things in dev, and that's fine because they haven't been put in production. I don't care that they're not in prod yet. But up here, we do have one object that's in prod that's not in dev, and we probably shouldn't have that, and I might want to go in and look. And so here I can see I've got a column named order val number that's on my orders table, and it differs, and we might want to go in and look at that. The same way down here, I've got objects that are in both my source and target, my dev and prod, that should be the same but somehow different. So like here, I've got two functions. One, we can see under the differs by column, differs by status, but this OW create order differs by code. So I want to go in and investigate that. So I'm going to do a right click here. And one of the options I have is to do show difference details. So when I click on that, I click in here, and now we can see those two objects, those functions side by side. So up here, here's the one that's in prod, and here's the one that's in dev. And down at the bottom, you see a little legend, pink, orange, yellow, green, purple. Over here, there's a little thing showing you where all the changes are. So here we can see our differences. We can see 4 or 5 differences here. And on this one, this is a line that was deleted. So somehow we deleted it out in the dev, but it's still in the prod, or it was added in there. Check new columns, a little comment, so it's no big deal. But if we look at this line here, this was modified. We can see it says set order ID equal OID plus 1. Let's go over to the other side and we can see it says set order ID equal OID plus 10, and the 0 is in red. So we can see that's the difference. So somehow these got out of sync. So what am I going to do? Do I want to make the source like the target like the source? Well, I'm going to have to go investigate that. But once I determine why these are out of sync, what's nice here is I can come back down here and I'm just going to deselect all these things here for the moment and then just select this OW create order. And if I do a right click, I can now generate and show a sync script to sync these up. So very nice. And we can do that with objects as well as comparing data. So we've been going at this an hour and 15 minutes. I'd like to open this up to questions before we turn it over to Susan, who's going to talk about Foglight for databases, your 24/7 monitoring tool. So with that, are there any questions? You can type those into chat. Doesn't look like there's anything now, or you can take yourself off mute and ask a question. And if there are no questions, I thank everyone for your time. This has been recorded, so you can go back. So does someone have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. First, I just want to say is a ton of valuable information and what you showed us.
Thank you.
But part of what I'm thinking is as you're going through these things is where does all this get saved off to in and what I'm thinking is if like I had to change workstations or go to a different installation, or maybe I've got a home computer or a work computer or whatever, is there a way to easily transfer these little shortcuts and customizations and stuff that I've done, saved code, that kind of thing, from one to the other, or at least back it up or whatever?
Yes, that's a great question, and there's two different ways to do that. The sort of kludgy way, but make sure you get everything always, is you can see right now I'm showing the path of my install, and your install path to be very similar. The users, app data, Quest software, Toad for Oracle, 13.2. In this user files folder, we save off all those like SQL recalls, all your settings, all your shortcuts. Everything will be saved in there. So you can copy that folder and then just paste it into, like, you've taken your work computer and you want to make your home computer the same. You can do that. But you can also, the more easy way to do it is up here under, let's see, where is it? It's under utilities. Oh, here we go. Copper, been talking too long. Copy user settings. So you can just come here under utilities, do the copy user settings, and you can copy from one previous installation to another, or you can just export it out to a file and then use that to import it in or export it out. And you can also reset to a clean installation if it gets too, like, I'm not sure what's all and I just want to start over. But the copy user settings is the cleaner way to do it, but sometimes it's also nice just to copy that user files folder manually just to make sure you have it. So if they upgrade your desktop or something like that, you haven't lost everything.
All right, that's great. That's a great feature to be able to export all that and move it and that kind of thing. So that's perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, hopefully you're dazzled into silence. I haven't put you into sleep and your coffee didn't wear off. Susan, I'm going to finish up now, and I'm thanking everyone. So now Susan Wong will be charming you with all her knowledge on Foglight for databases.
Thank you, Russ. So if Russ puts you to sleep, you can wake up now. I'm just kidding. Thank you, Russ. That was an awesome presentation. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now to talk about Foglight for databases.
Susan, before you jump in, I just wanted to mention to everyone that this is a solution that you guys don't have. So we're just wanting to show it to you, see if it might be of interest to you guys. So if you can, give us some feedback after this or even throughout, we'd really appreciate it. We just want to know if you all are interested and if you see it as a use case. And then also, if it is something that you're interested in, we can send out trial keys and you can trial it on your own and we can help you with that as well. So I just wanted to mention that before we got into everything. So you all are kind of aware of, what we're trying to show you today.
Great, thanks, Brianna.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so.
We can't see your screen anymore, Susan. I don't know. Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, so as Brianna said and Russ, that this is a monitoring solution for databases. And what's really one of the unique things about this is that it can monitor all different types of databases and environments. So multiple platforms gives you that full view of your database environment, whether you're running Oracle, SQL Server, DB2. I'll let you read all of the different environments that we support, as well as the NoSQL environments, MongoDB and Cassandra, also databases in cloud and the open source databases over here. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Are you able to see this? That's the dashboard. Okay, so this is the Foglight main dashboard that you would log into, where it allows you to see all these different types of databases. So you can see in my environment, I'm monitoring Oracle and SQL Server, DB2, Postgres, all of these tiles, we call them, that represent the different types of databases and the number of databases that I am monitoring in this environment, as well as in each of these tiles, you can see how many normal, warning, critical, and fatal alerts there might be. And across the top, that bar is just an indication of the entire environment, how stable or if there are any performance issues. So the idea behind Foglight for databases is to understand, first of all, if there is a problem, getting alerts, and then being able to diagnose what those issues are and potentially resolve them. Okay, so I'm gonna take you through seeing an alert, understanding what that alert is, where it came from, who's involved, who is impacted by that, what is impacted by that, and then we're gonna get down to the deep dive diagnostics, where I'm gonna do a dimensional analysis, which means we're able to see who the user was that ran the SQL, if there's SQL statements that are having performance issues, what databases they're in, what programs ran those SQL statements, really deep dive information, and be able to do things like comparing those dimensions between different time ranges, being able to see other changes in the environment that could have impacted the performance, like schema changes or execution plan changes or OS changes. We do monitor the OS as well when we're monitoring the database. And to show you a little bit about this screen, we can set up specific groups of databases so that you can go to specific sets of databases that perhaps you are responsible for. So you can see at the bottom here, these different database groups. Say, for example, you're always looking at maybe you have a set of production instances you want to look at, or maybe there's just this demo group of databases, or however you need to set up your view of the databases, that can be set as well. So when you log into Foglight, you're logging in as a specific user. You can see I'm logged in as DB admin on the right there. And that provides me certain privileges and allows me to see certain things. So we'll talk about that as we go through this view of Foglight. Okay, so right now I'm clicked on all instances. So I'm seeing in the lower panel here all of the instances that I'm monitoring. But if I were just Needing to look at Oracle, I could click on that panel, and now I just see those 7 Oracle instances here. So in this bottom panel, I'm able to see the highest severity level alert, the name of the instance. Here I have the version of the instance and how long it's been up. Okay, this right here is showing me the workload. That is to say, how busy is this instance? And note that when I hover over it, I'm able to see a little history of that workload. And when I look at the history, it's the last 60 minutes. The reason that is because I'm able to change that view from the last 60 minutes to whatever time range I'm interested in to evaluate what's happening in your database. So a little bit about the architecture of Foglight. Foglight has a management server that maintains a repository of performance metrics. And let me just show you that. So it maintains a repository of the performance metrics. The management server is the brains of the whole thing. So this also may be running a Foglight agent manager where that connects to the database and also the OS, which allows you then to get those performance metrics. So the Foglight is agentless. That is to say there are no agents running on the database servers. We run an agent manager either on the Foglight management server or elsewhere closer to the database servers, but not on the servers. And so the number of agent managers depends on the number of instances that are being monitored. So there's a scale such that you have so many agents per agent manager. So there is 1 agent per instance being monitored, and we would help you with setting up that configuration depending on the number of instances that you're monitoring. So that Foglight repository maintains all the performance metrics, and those help us to, first of all, see the history, but also it generates this baseline. So getting back to this workload, you see that light blue area under the actual dark line. And what that's showing you is what's normal for your environment. So it takes all that history for this particular metric and averages it out to this, what we call baseline. So you can see what's normal for your environment by hour of the day, day of the week, and day of the month. Meaning, for example, you may have month-end reporting and therefore your activity would increase. And so you would see the baseline increase, sort of like what you see here in the earlier minutes of this hour. And so when it goes outside of the baseline, the actual metric, which would be the dark blue line, then you would have a deviation alert. Okay, so that's one type of alert. I'll talk a little bit more about the alarms later. And so here we have the alarms, how many warning, critical, and fatal alarms there are. And also here on the right side, we see the host information. So we do monitor the host, the OS metrics on when we set up a database agent to monitor. So here we can see that there's the host, here's the CPU. Note that when I mouse over these, you can see that baseline for each of these metrics. So you do get the baseline for all the metrics that are generated. Those are all saved in the Foglight repository. Okay. And so these are all the different instances I monitor, Oracle instances I monitor. Notice I see a 3-node rack. So here I can see the 3 instances of the rack. We also cover data guard, ASM, if you're running clusters, if you're running Exadata. We also provide performance information about those areas as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some of these alerts. So it helps you to understand how you detect, diagnose, and resolve. So here we have some of the alerts on this one particular instance. And you can see the severity level, which is critical, when this alarm alerted. Note there's an acknowledged and cleared columns here. So I mentioned that I'm connected as the DB admin, as user called DB admin. So my account has certain privileges and certain access rights. But the other reason for that is to let the rest of the community understand if I am acknowledging alert that my account would show here as well as cleared. And so that would let the rest of the community know when there's alert if somebody's looking into it and who that person is. And you'll also be able to put notes around this particular alert to help the rest of the community understand what might be the problem, what you're doing about it, and maybe make other suggestions. And also when it's cleared, you'd be able to document what was done to clear this. So here we see the instance this happened on. This is the message. So that's the particular alert. So let's go ahead and drill down on one of these messages, and it comes up with a information panel that shows us more detail on this alert. So here we can see it came from this instance. It's affecting this table space. Here are the actual metrics surrounding that table space. We can get some history on that. This things affected, this is actually the groups of databases that are being affected. What I showed you earlier on the groups panel on the left side, to group databases organized such that those are databases that you normally see or what you want to see as a group. So these are the groups of databases that this database is in these groups. And then down here, you're able to understand what that alarm is, you know, that is affecting a table space. And then there are some suggestions on how to fix this particular issue. And then, as I mentioned, that you can have notes here. So here's the history, how many times this alert went off, when it happened, how long it was going on, and who acknowledged and or cleared this. Adding notes, you would just click on this button here, and then you could add a note with regard to this particular alarm. It would show up here, and you would be able to see when that note was entered and also who entered the note. Okay, and notice here you can acknowledge and clear the alert. Okay, so let's get down to analyzing the database. So I'm going to go ahead and drill down on this database. I'll click here and I get an overview of how this particular instance is running. So I can see how long it's been up. I can see if I'm monitoring both the database and the OS. Notice I don't have data guard configured here, so I'm not running that, but I see the storage here. I see infrastructure information here. And then at the bottom, I'm able to see more instance database level metrics. On the right side, I'm able to see the alarms in this, again, last 60 minutes, and then also the top 10 SQL. So this is a high level overview and probably very common for your databases, monitoring databases. But what I like to do is get down to the SQL PI. We call that the SQL Performance Investigator, where this is where I can do that dimensional analysis. This is where I can do more detailed analysis of what's happening in my database. So if I were to see some alerts, maybe I'm seeing some, let's see, get this over here. There might be some issues with CPU. Note here, we see that the CPU is a little bit high. So I can look at that baseline breakdown in terms of the resource consumption, but I can also go to the breakdown, which would show me these type of metrics. Basically, this is a weight analysis view of the database. Now, notice that there's hardly anything there, but right in this range, I see a little bit of activity. So I could just zoom into that time range, and now I can see what's happening there in terms of, I can say, well, what SQL statements were happening when we're seeing this a little bit higher CPU usage. So if I click on SQL statements, now here's all the SQL statements that were running during that time. So point being that since we're collecting all of this history, maybe you had some issues last week, or maybe there was last night while you weren't looking at the system, there was some kind of complaining by the users that the system was really slow. So you can go back to that time range using this, either the calendar, selecting a specific time, or going to the timeline where I can change this window to, right now you see it's 24 hours. I can stretch or contract that and then move it to whatever time range I want. So I can get to that time range when I was having the issue and then analyze what was going on at that time doing this dimensional analysis. So I'll be able to see what OS users are on, what database users were on, what PL SQL blocks were being used, what programs were being run, and all of this other information here. And so in this way, I zoomed into that time range. I could even zoom in closer because you can see that there's just this period of time when things were happening, and then selecting that SQL statements, I can see here are the SQL statements that we're running, and by default, those are sorted by the active time. Let me see. No, I think it's actually, okay, it's sorted by the CPU, and the reason for that is that the CPU is the highest resource being used in this time range. So if I was more interested in active time, that is to say, how long these SQL statements were running, we like to see which SQL statement is taking the most time or causing the user's grief because its response time is too slow, then we can sort by the active time. So whatever I sort by, I can find the worst SQL per that performance metric. You can see they're all here, the elapsed time, the disk reads, the fetches, number of executions, and so forth. Once I find that SQL statement I'm interested in, I can at that point do some tuning. So the tuning lab that Russ showed a little earlier this hour, you can send that to the tuning lab as long as you have that installed on your desktop. So Foglight is a web browser interface. So you can run it from anywhere. You can run a browser. If you have the SQL Optimizer installed on that desktop when you're running it and you want to tune SQL, you can just hit this Tune SQL button and we'll send it to the tuning lab. Okay, so Russ already explained how that works, where it can generate different rewrites of the SQL statement. You can find the best one with the best execution plan, or you could find maybe an index that would help improve the performance of the database. With Foglight, we're looking at performance. So we've captured the performance of that SQL statement up until that time. Once you do the tuning, you would put that, let's say you tune the SQL in your dev environment, and now you put it back in production, that new SQL statement, or maybe there was a suggestion to add an index, and now you've added the index and it's not running any better, or so you think. So what you can do with Foglight is to run a compare. So I select that SQL statement, and I'm going to compare the performance of that SQL statement in the time window that I had in the previous window that is selected. So there's my SQL statement, there's the time range, and I'm going to compare this same dimension in a different time range. So I'm going to just select the day before, and hopefully, so this would be like before and after I tune the SQL. And so running this compare is going to allow me to see the performance before and after. Okay, that wasn't a good one, so I'm not seeing the, let me go back and find a better SQL statement. Let's do this one with the delete, because we're not getting data from that time range. So I'm gonna run the compare, and let's say that same dimension. See if we get some better data here. No. So anyway, what this would show me is, I gotta get a good one here. Okay, let me just get to a bigger time range. And we'll find a good comparison to show you what you can see in that time range. Okay, that looks a little better. So I'm gonna do the compare, and I'll select that same time range from the day before. There we go. So now we can see, let's do this from, let's do this SQL statement here. I can't get a nice view for you to see. Let me see. Let's do this one. Oh, that's not very interesting. And compare. Not much activity in this demo environment. Well, anyway, so you can see the blue line is the top SQL statement in that time range, and then the gray line is the same SQL statement in a different time range. So you can compare the performance between the two to understand which one is why the other one might be running better than the other one in terms of all of these different dimensions. Okay. The other thing you can do is compare instances. So if I wanted to see how the dev environment was performing compared to the prod environment, I can compare this instance. So here I'm looking at this Aura prod instance, and I want to compare it to another instance. I could choose that different instance, run a compare, and then I could see how it's running between the two, again, in the same time range, and then also compare how that database is doing statistically. So you can see the blue is the top instance or a prod, and the bottom gray line is the rack environment. So you can compare the two, and also you can compare what we call the changes in the environment, the change tracking. So things that happen in the environment could affect the performance of the database. So those point in time changes, execution plan changes, Oracle configuration, schema changes, system changes. We also have a category for user defined, but these up here are tracked automatically. When I click on change tracking, I'm able to see when those events happened along a timeline that shows me the resource consumption. So what this gives you is that if there's a change in the environment, if there's a big spike in resource usage right after a change in the environment, that change in the environment might have caused that performance degradation. Okay, so here I can see at the bottom what those changes are. You can see that the schema changes are the pink dot here. We can see Oracle configuration changes, the blue dots. And so you can see that in the tabular view here, exactly what those changes are. Okay, and then also we give you these advisories, which are basically little reports on particular issues your database is seeing again in that time range. So here we can see that there's issues with bind variables, the fact that there are candidates for bind variables. When I open this up, you see a nice report that first of all explains that this high percentage of hard parsing indicates that these similar SQL statements could be doing too much hard parsing. If you had a bind variable, then you would eliminate that, that resource usage. So it shows you the metrics that support that need for the bind variables. It shows you the samples of where that might apply. And then also here, down here, it shows you the actual SQL statements that are good candidates for the bind variables and gives you the reason there, the parsing user, how many times it's seen to have run during that time range. gives you some information to have you understand why you should even be looking at this. And then here's the recommendation at the bottom. Okay, so a really nice report on things you can do to improve the performance of your database, and specifically around certain activity in your database. Here you can see CPU usage deviation. Here's some IO and network weight deviations. And note that these deviations, deviation means against the baseline. So again, we're going back to that baseline, that what's normal for your environment, that's what we're looking at, rather than just setting levels to go against. It's customizing the alerts specific to your environment. Okay. Okay, I wanted to show you blocking history. Not sure we're getting any here. Okay, good. So in this timer, it looks like we are having some blocking. And this report is really nice because it shows you who's blocking and who's being blocked. So each of these two lines, these pairs of lines here, are showing you the blocking history. And you can see that. It will show you the objects that's involved. First of all, the sessions, when this happened, and then how long it's been going on, what programs are involved, the database users, and it does actually give you the the statements that are being run and causing those blocking activity. Okay. Okay, so let's look at the dimensional analysis. Now, the dimensional analysis on the left side here. Oh, let me pause to see if there's any questions so far. I don't see anything in the chat.
Looks like Farhana might have a question. I see a question mark up.
Oh,
She asked, can you send me the steps to change color in different environments in Toad? Okay, so it looks like she may have had a question.
Sounds like a Toad question. Russ will be all over that. Okay, let's go ahead with the dimensional analysis. So let's say you saw a problem, or there was, like last night or last week, you go to that time range. Let's say the users were complaining, it was really slow. And so you go to that time range, and then now you can do this dimensional analysis. You can see what SQL statements are running, what programs were running. You can see the performance of each one. The example I like to use is sometimes we know of a particular user in your company that is always running some rogue thing that's causing issues. You can expand the database users here. So if I click on database users now, on the right side, you see each of the users. You can see overall how they are hitting the system in terms of CPU, disk, read, writes, and so forth. But if you want to see particularly what they're running, so let's say it's this PAO work user. So I expand that, and I can see what programs they're running, what sessions, what client PIDs they're hitting from. But let's look at the program. So I may see a whole list of programs. Maybe I know that that one user is always running this one program, that they are always running some rogue SQL, and maybe it's just SQL Plus. So now when I click on, maybe it's, okay, so I can go ahead and click on SQL statements now. And now I see all the SQL statements. Oh, that's not a good one. Or maybe it's just slow. Yeah, it's thinking. So now I would see all the SQL statements that user is running. This PAO SQL statement, PAO work user is running in that program. And then again, I can go ahead and tune the SQL. I can run compare. I can see the analyze plan or view the execution plan. I can view the SQL in a bigger area. So this gives me insight directly into what a specific user is doing. So if I open up that SQL statement, I can see what program it's running, who the OS user is, what machine it came from. So a lot of deep dive information to understand what's going on in your system, and then run the analytics to understand how you can resolve, if there is a problem, how to resolve that. Okay. Okay, so let me show you a few other things. I want to get into the rules to have you understand how Foglight alerts. I'm going to go ahead and select one of the instances. I'm going to go to configure alarms. And what you're going to see is a whole list of rules that Foglight has out of the box to alert you that there's a performance issue. Now, note that Foglight can alert you, send an email, but it can also start corrective action, meaning run a script, or it can send SNMP traps. So if you have another framework that you want to send these alerts to, you can do that automatically as well. But first, I want to go to the sensitivity level. And what this means is that a lot of times when people install a monitoring solution, they are barraged with alerts, and there are just so many, tend to just ignore them. So really, you need to tune the monitoring solution to give you the alerts that are going to help you in determining when there are performance issues specific to your environment. So when you set up an agent in Foglight, you would specify what sensitivity level you want for that specific agent. And what I mean by that is, you see here, essential. This shows you all of the rules. And then on the right side, it check boxes which of the levels of alerts you want to be active for this specific agent or this instance that you're setting up. Okay, so you can see that for essential, very few are selected, only those that we feel are essential. But note that you can change any of these templates, and you can always restore them to what they originally were, but all of these can be set for your environment. So then you notice that normal has quite a few more, and then tuning would have everyone selected, such that when you start it up, you would be barraged with all these alerts, but you would at least know which ones Foglight thinks are warning, critical, and fatal, and then you would deselect those that you that are appropriate for your particular environment. Okay. And so once you create the agent with that sensitivity level, you can then go more granular and fine tune those alerts for a specific agent, for a specific object. For example, let's say there are certain table spaces you didn't care if they got really, really big. You didn't want to be alerted on that. You can exclude that particular table space. So there's a lot of granular things you can do at the rule level to configure the alarms just the way you like them, or just the way that makes sense for your environment. So here you see the list of alarms. They are all categorized. And just let me scroll down to show you that there is a section that we call the deviation rules, and that is, those are the ones that have to do with the baseline. So you see this section here is for the baseline. And the others, though, so those you would not set severity levels, because it's just if it goes outside the baseline. However, if you are looking at something like latches in the shared pool, for example, or space, for example, well, maybe like table space, where you would see, 80, 90, 95% is warning, critical, and fatal. Here we have the latch shared pool. You can see that there are fatal, critical, and warning levels here. I can go ahead and, actually this is the email notification. So at warning level, it would send this email. What you do, again, there's the global level, and then you can get much more granular. So at a global level, you would set the email server and the connection and all that, and also who the alarms are coming from. And then you would set for each of your different types of databases, again, at a global level, your DBA, who is going to receive all those alerts. But for specific instances, you may want different people. This is where you can set that specific to the individual that's responsible for this instance, for example. Okay. And then the alarm settings, this is where you can set those severity levels. So if I hit edit here, I can change those boundaries. So 0 to 5 is okay, 5 to 15 is critical, and then we don't have it set for fatal. Okay, so anything above 15 is going to show you the critical. Okay, so this is the very simple, straightforward way to set the alarms, but you can get, as I mentioned, very, very granular to do some detail conditions on which an alert is sent or created, and then change things like who it's sent to and what actions are executed when the alarm is true, like starting a script or sending an email or sending an SNMP trap to another framework. Okay. Okay, so while I'm on this administrative screen, note that we can create a user-defined collection. So you're probably going to find everything pretty much out of the box in terms of what type of performance metrics are collected. But if you have your favorite scripts that you run and you like to see certain data, you can create a user-defined collection. You would just add it here. And then you would define how often it collects. So offline, it means that there's nobody on the system. So you might want to collect less frequently on that particular metric. And then online means somebody is on the system, that is to say, is looking in Foglight, but they are not looking at that screen or that dashboard that is showing this particular metric. But if you're real time, then somebody is looking at that metric at the dashboard that has that metric. Therefore, the frequency of collection, you might want to make that higher. So they're seeing more up-to-date real-time data. Okay, and then you would specify query timeout. So all of the collections of metrics are set up in this manner if we look at collection settings. But just to finish up with the user-defined collections, once you define this, then there's a specific dashboard that you would be able to see the output of that user-defined collection. Okay, so having said that, you can create custom dashboards that will show any metric in just about any manner you want by creating a custom dashboard. And I'm noticing I'm very close to the top of the hour. So I'll just show you that very quickly. And then, in fact, are there any other questions while I'm moving to that screen? Not any other, I guess, any questions. Okay.
Does anyone see a use? Would they like a trial license? Just curious. Anybody? And you can tell us in the chat or via email as well. Thanks.
I just need to move this out of the way. Okay, so what I'm showing here is a dashboard that is pretty much open for editing or creating. So on the right side, I'm opening the data to be able to find a specific instance in order to pull some data into it. So I want to look at an Oracle instance. I can look at this particular instance, and let's say I'm interested in getting my IO activity on this dashboard, and In fact, I want to just put it right on top of this dashboard because I wanted to see that in addition. So here you can see now I've added that metric here. So that's the way I can just pull a metric in to the dashboard. So if I wanted to create a new one, I would just drop it in a new space here, select that metric, and notice here's how I can change how that metric looks. So I can make it look any manner. I'll leave it as a line graph. I can put the metric labels, and then poof, there it is. Okay, and then you can also create custom reports that way too. So I hope I've given you some good idea of what Foglight for databases can do, that it does alert you if there are performance issues, and that you can get to the deep dive diagnostics to understand what that issue is, and understand what is contributing to that. Okay, so if there's no more questions or comments, again, if you're interested in demoing this product, getting more information, or doing a proof of concept, we can certainly set you up to do that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Susan.
Anytime.
Did we have any other questions? I see, Peter, that you asked a question about Toad, and I will get with Russell and get back to you on that, that as well. And then Mark Davidson is on as well, Susan, and he said thank you. Peter said thank you as well.
Appreciate it.
And then I went ahead and put my email in the chat, everyone. So if you do want to do a proof of concept or a trial of Foglight, feel free to email me and I can send you over a trial key. All right, so if we don't have any more questions, thank you all for your time today. Thank you, Susan and Russell. We really appreciated it. And I hope you all have a great day. Feel free to reach out if you need anything. And then this recording will all be automatically sent out to all of you following this, this webinar. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Brianna. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
You. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.